This is Brother Peter Diamond of MostHolyFamilyMonastery.com. There is proof for purgatory in the Bible. It's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 15. Let's examine this biblical proof for purgatory. No matter how hard non-Catholics who deny the existence of purgatory might try to explain it away, this verse cannot be explained away. I will quote the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, a famous Protestant translation. 1 Corinthians 3, 12-15, quote, "For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire. And the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire." End quote. Now let's look at the last part of this passage again. In 1 Corinthians 3:15, we see that it says, quote, "If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire." End quote. So we have a man whose works have been judged. His works are in fact burned, and he suffers loss, yet he is saved, but by fire. He suffers loss, but is saved by fire. What does this suffer loss mean? Well, the Greek word which is translated as suffer loss is a form of the Greek word zemio. Forms of this same Greek word zemio, which is translated as suffer loss in 1 Corinthians 3:15, are found in other passages of the Bible, in Exodus 21:22, Proverbs 17:26, Proverbs 19:19, and elsewhere. This very Greek word zemio is used to mean punishment. That means that zemio, the very word translated as suffer loss in 1 Corinthians 3:15, can mean punishment. Therefore, the man who suffers loss and is saved by fire in 1 Corinthians 3:15 can mean a man who is punished and is saved by fire. Doesn't that sound just like purgatory? Yes, it sounds exactly like purgatory because that's what it's referring to. But there is more from the context to demonstrate the point. Who is this man, and why is he suffering loss or punishment and being saved by fire? The context of 1 Corinthians chapter 3 deals with members of the Church of Christ. It deals with Corinthian Christian believers. In 1 Corinthians 3:3, we see that some of these Corinthian Christians were falling into sinful imperfections and offenses against God. Some of these bad works or sins are described in 1 Corinthians 3:3 as strife, divisions, and envying. So the context of 1 Corinthians 3 deals with the different kinds of works of believers. Some of them are not so good. These different kinds of works are described in 1 Corinthians 3:12. There are good works, which are called gold, silver, and precious stones. These signify a better or more perfect adherence to the gospel of Christ. Then there are other works which are not so good. These are described as wood, hay, and stubble. These are the works that are in fact burned in 1 Corinthians 3:15, for which the man suffers loss or punishment, but he is saved, yet so as by fire. So the wood, hay, and stubble, which are burned, signify the works of a man who has died in the grace of God and been forgiven of any mortal sins he might have committed, and he is therefore eventually saved, but he hasn't made satisfaction for the sins that he did commit. The Dogmatic Council of Lyon II in 1274 put it this way, quote, "Because if they die truly repentant in charity before they have made satisfaction by worthy fruits of penance for sins committed and omitted, Their souls are cleansed after death for purgatorial or purifying punishments." End quote. A great example of a man who has been forgiven of his mortal sin, but hasn't made satisfaction for it, is found in the case of David. In 2 Kings 11, or 2 Samuel 11 in the Protestant Bible, we read about King David committing adultery with Bathsheba. He also had Bathsheba's husband killed. This is a mortal sin. If David would have died in that state, he would have gone to hell. 1 Corinthians 6:9 shows us that no adulterers or murderers will enter heaven. But David repented of his sin when convicted of it by Nathan in 2 Samuel 12. 2 Samuel 12:13 or 2 Kings 12:13, quote, "And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, The Lord also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die." End quote. The Lord took away David's sin, and Nathan said that he would not die, meaning he would not eternally die. The sin was forgiven because David truly repented and turned from it. But was that the end of it? No. Full satisfaction for this mortal sin which he had committed and been forgiven for had not yet been made. We read in 2 Samuel 12:14-15 that David had to undergo the loss of his child to make satisfaction for his sin, a sin which had already been forgiven. 2 Samuel 12:14-15, quote, "Because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. And Nathan departed unto his house. And the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick." End quote. This kind of satisfaction for the remaining punishments due to forgiven mortal sins is often done on earth by good works and prayers and by a more perfect adherence to the true faith. If such satisfaction is not done on earth, it is and must be done in purgatory, assuming that the person dies in the grace of God. The satisfaction must be done because the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse, makes it clear that nothing impure shall enter heaven. Apocalypse 21:27, quote, "There shall not enter into it anything defiled." End quote. Now it must be emphasized that purgatory is not for those who die in mortal sin or outside the true faith. It is only for those who die in the state of grace, which is also known as the state of justification. It is for those who die in grace but haven't satisfied for the temporal punishment due to their forgiven mortal or venial sins. Mortal sins destroy the state of justification. That's why 1 John 5:16 distinguishes between sins which lead to death and sins which don't. 1 John 5:16, quote, "If any man see his brother sin a sin which is not unto death, he shall ask, and he shall give him life for them that sin not unto death. There is a sin unto death. I do not say that he shall pray for it. All unrighteousness is sin, and there is a sin not unto death." End quote. So we see a distinction between sins unto death and sins not unto death. Venial sins, that is, lesser offenses against God, weaken the soul and make it more vulnerable to mortal sin. Mortal sins destroy the state of grace and put one in a state of damnation, so that if one dies in the state of mortal sin, he will be damned. Examples of mortal sins are fornication, murder, drunkenness, lying, cheating, stealing, fraud, theft, masturbation, looking at pornography, giving full consent to impure thoughts, homosexuality, heresy, idolatry, violating the commandments, etc. That's why 1 Corinthians 3:17, just after the verse which proves purgatory, 1 Corinthians 3:15, says this, quote, "If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are." End quote. This verse is referring to those who die in mortal sin, those who die unjustified. They will be lost. Mortal sin after baptism can be forgiven only by confession to a valid priest, as proven from John 20:23. Baptism, the initial grace of spiritual rebirth, the rebirth of water and the Holy Ghost spoken of in John chapter 3 verse 5, forgives all original, mortal, and venial sin, as well as the temporal punishment due to sin, so that if one dies after baptism, assuming he has the full Christian faith, the Catholic faith, he will go straight to heaven. But mortal sin after baptism can be forgiven only by confession to a valid priest, as proven from John 20:23. It could also be forgiven by perfect contrition with the desire to go to confession. 1 Corinthians 3:17 serves to prove that the context of 1 Corinthians 3 is dealing with sins. That's very important because it establishes that the lesser sins, or the satisfactions or imperfections, which are left over for some and burned up in 1 Corinthians 3:15, are indeed punishments for sins in purgatory.